Can I pass it? Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for all the work you're doing on policy development and policy making. And I want you to give a really big thank you to Carol in our head office and many, many other people who put a really huge amount of work in to organising today's event, because it's an absolute first for the Labour Party that we organise a policy discussion of members who've chosen to come along, and I'm very grateful that you're here, but also to stream it online so that members all over the country can access it and then also come back to us through Twitter, Facebook and other ideas. And so we're going to be analysing everything that happens today, see if this is a model that we can work with for the future, but it's something that I think we've made a very good stab at starting today, and I want you to really thank all those that have worked so hard to make today happen. When Tom and I started discussing how we would do this thing quite a few months ago, we realised there was going to be a helicopter outside the building throughout my speech. And so we obviously should have chosen somewhere else. But I was very keen that we should hold the event in the southwest region for a number of reasons. One is that it is the largest English region of the Labour Party. Secondly, that it has basically quite poor communications across the whole region. A region that extends from Wiltshire right down to Cornwall is obviously very large. And it also has inadequate train connections, inadequate bus connections, and it has a huge myriad of problems, one of which is the housing crisis that affects to some extent the whole of the country, but it affects the southwest in a very particular way, because you've got the dichotomy of very expensive retirement homes, weekend retreat and holiday cottages, and large numbers of people living in very poor quality private rented accommodation during the winter months in seaside towns, and a considerable number of homeless people in Weymouth, as well as in a number of cities across the region. In fact, as explained, if you look at Teignbridge as the lowest paid place in the UK, you look at Devon and Cornwall as the low paid capital of Britain. And whilst the government might be proud of its supposed march towards a living wage, in my book it's not a living wage. What they're not doing is really addressing the issues of inequality, injustice and poverty in this country. And so, to all our members across the southwest that have come here today, and I know some of you have come from Cornwall, so you've made a huge journey to come here today. I'm really grateful to you for making that journey. I'm very grateful to you for the contribution you've made to the discussions we've been in. I've been here all day with Tom and Angela and others, listening to what people have said, and I've gained an awful lot of very, very good ideas from it. Not just how we campaign, but what the issues are and how we face them. And I tell you this, that our party extends to every part of the UK. We're going to be campaigning in every part of the UK. There are no no-go areas for us. We'll take on Tories and Tory values wherever they find themselves, because we have different values, which are the values of ordinary people looking for real social justice in this country. That's what this party is about. And I also want to say a huge thank you to Scott for coming over at quite short notice, an enormous journey. Planes, yeah? He thinks it's 10 o'clock in the morning, that's why he wants his breakfast. And giving us such a fascinating description of how the $15 an hour campaign developed in the United States. And it's interesting because we tend to look at campaigns in terms of wage campaigns, in terms of you recruit people to the union, you strengthen the union, you then try and improve the wages and conditions. I'm a former union organiser, I fully understand that and I fully get that. If you're living in a legal framework where it's relatively easy to get union recognition, as it used to be, where it was relatively easy to persuade an employer that it was a good idea to negotiate with the union, then that is a relatively logical thing to do. That is the way we do it. But in the USA, they have a very different union structure. And I think by choosing the $15 an hour campaign, they set the framework around a question of social justice, bought into a political process, developed a social political movement around $15 an hour that has been spectacularly successful. And I absolutely congratulate them on the work that they've achieved in that, because it has shown very big multinational corporations who in country after country live by state subsidies to low wages through in-work benefits, that their time is over. They've got to start paying their workers properly, and I, for one, will be supporting the demands that are made on April the 14th, and I'm delighted with the work that that union has done. I want to say thank you to Ian and the Bakers Union for heading up the fast food campaign in this country and the work they've done towards April the 14th, and I'm delighted that I've been invited as a reciprocal arrangement to address your conference in August in Richmond in Virginia. Thank you very much for that invitation. Now, what Angela and Tom have just said has been very important. What Angela said about the development of party process of policy making is very important, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. What Tom said about the way in which a high technology economy is developing, a digital economy is developing, and the way that because of the lack of social control over economy after economy, not just in this country, in Europe and the wider world, in reality, it's become a method of transferring large amounts of wealth from those who actually do the work to those that actually own the business. And Tom explained that extremely well in the graphics that he put forward. So do we say technology is a bad thing, robots are a bad thing, internet is a bad thing, Facebook is a bad thing, Twitter is a bad thing? Well, we could say all of that. It wouldn't, unfortunately, go away just because we said that. The technology wouldn't uninvent itself because we said that. No, we have to say that if there is, and there are, huge technological advances in our society, we all benefit from them. We should all benefit fully from them. They shouldn't be a vehicle for the redistribution of wealth in the wrong direction. They should be a vehicle for improving the life chances, living standards and opportunities of everybody in the community, not just for the elite that happen to own those companies. And so what Tom has done in this, in the discussions we've had, is to open up a very, very important conversation. Now, today isn't the last stage or even the middle stage of the policy making within this party, but by opening up that conversation and that debate about how we deal with technology, it opens up a very big debate about the power of global corporations and how they have managed to utilize this technology for their great profitably benefit, but not for the benefit of everybody else. And so there is a lot of work to do in this area, and we've got to take that work on. And we're going to do that because this party is very, very serious about the process we make in this policy development towards the general election in 2020. We're committed to the people of this country. We're committed to using digital technology as the powerful tool that it is. But we're also very committed to using social media as a very important campaigning tool for everything that we do. Now, when I joined the Labour Party, I was 16 and I was a dab hand at working a Gestetner computer. I still could work a Gestetner computer if I had to, even the hand one. I've got one. It's in a museum. It's okay, Tom, don't worry. It's not in my office. It's okay. And for those at home, a Gestetner was a handmade duplicator made in Tottenham. They were very successful, but they are no longer in production. They've passed on a bit. But the system of communication we used to have was hoping that the general media would be kind to us and delivering leaflets as a way of getting through and talking to people. Delivering leaflets and talking to people is a very important part of political campaigning. But there are other ways of campaigning, and that is through internet communication, through social media, and so on. And it can be very fast and very, very powerful. It has changed governments in various parts of the world. The use of social media in the Philippines, the use of social media in India, the use of social media in a very large number of countries where they've managed to fundamentally change the whole human rights agenda by the power of social media. Don't underestimate it. And when the government made its, Tata Steel rather, made its desperate announcement earlier this week on Tuesday of what the future of the British steel industry was, we acted straight away, obviously. Angela and John McDonnell have put forward a very good plan on the steel industry, which I'll come on to in a second, and we decided we'd immediately launch an online petition, and within a few hours we had got over 100,000 people signing a petition online in support of our demands on the steel industry and that Parliament be recalled. That's 100,000 people mobilised in a few hours. That is a very, very powerful tool that those that founded our party, those that organised trade unions in the first place, never had at their disposal. And it's developing a sense of solidarity from it. But social media doesn't have to be a one-way tool. It doesn't have to be me sending a message to everybody else. It can be everybody else sending a message to everybody else. It can actually widen and broaden the conversation. And to all those who are watching this online, or those in this room who do it online, please let's desist from using social media for abusive comments about each other. It's not very helpful. People seem to think they can say things on social media they wouldn't dream of saying to somebody's face and they would never put in a normal written letter. A social media should have the same levels of politeness and etiquette that we'd expect from anything else in society. On the steel industry, I was there in Port Talbot this week, and there's something appalling about what is happening. This is an industry that's been in Port Talbot since 1901. It's been in this country ever since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the iron industry and then the steel industry. We have such incredible skills that manufacture steel in this country. And are they all to lose their jobs? Is the industry to be closed down simply because a global corporation decides that is the way forward, and the inability to control dumped steel imports means the industry is totally undermined as a result of it? Or is it the responsibility of government to actually do something about it to protect industries in this country? I think you'll probably agree with me that it is the responsibility of government to intervene to ensure we do have a steel industry in this country. So what we're saying is we want a plan to stabilise the industry, to drive demand, to reduce the burdens that the industry faces, to restructure to ensure a long-term sustainable future for Britain's steel industry, and that requires government intervention and government support for that industry to achieve it. We asked for the recall of Parliament. Unfortunately, under current parliamentary rules, that is in the hands of the Prime Minister, not the members of Parliament, or indeed not the general public. But we thought we'd encourage a change in this by launching the petition, and if you haven't yet signed it, please do, so that when we get back to Parliament Monday week, we'll have at least 200,000 signatures, if not thousands more, backing up our demand that the steel industry deserves public support. Those workers deserve to be able to work, and this country actually needs a steel industry so that we can develop the kind of manufacturing economy that we want. There were lots of very good ideas come out today on how we would develop that manufacturing economy and how we would use those good skills that are around that could be wasted if the steel industry was allowed to decline. As a party, our membership has gone up a great deal. We now have roughly 400,000 members. We have 100,000 or more registered supporters of the party beyond that. We have 3 million affiliated members through the trade unions in this party. So that is an awful lot of people who are directly involved with the Labour Party in some way or the other. Therefore, how we involve them, how we consult them, what contribution they can make, how they can make decisions for the party are something that are very, very important to me. So it's not just mobilising them to put forward a point of view in an emergency, as they've very helpfully and kindly done in respect of the steel industry this week, but it's also about how they can contribute their ideas to policy making. because I take the view that we've all joined the Labour Party because we believe in something different. We haven't joined the Labour Party to maintain the status quo. We haven't joined the Labour Party because we love the kind of free market capitalism that this government loves. We've joined the Labour Party because we believe in the intrinsic power of the democracy of people to control their own lives, control their own future, and the good in everybody and the ability in everybody to educate themselves, to inspire, to be optimistic, to achieve things, and to give something back to the rest of the community rather than just taking from the community. That surely is a fundamental Labour value. And so we have to develop a way in which these policies can be developed. So when we're talking, for example, on a housing policy, there are many good ideas. Council housing, I absolutely support. Regulation of the private rented sector, I absolutely support. Reasonable levels of cost for home ownership, and above all, an end to the, frankly, appalling situation we face with so many people sleeping rough on the streets of this country. It's got to end. We've all got ideas of how to do this. We've all got ideas on cooperative ownership and many other things. Feed them all in together. And as Angela says, the problem is actually how you deal with the amount that's sent in. Now, I've learnt this the hard way, because the day after I was elected, I realised that, I realised an awful lot of things were going to happen very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. And I looked at the diary that I'd been given, and it said, speak at the TUC, Prime Minister's question time, blah, 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 blah. Oh, yeah, okay. That's a lot. And then I thought, well, Prime Minister's question time. I want to do it differently. I know not everybody agrees with me on this, but I want to do it differently because I'm not absolutely a great fan of parliamentary theatre. I think Parliament should work for the people, not for itself. And so I sent out an email asking people what questions they would like me to ask. And we got, within a day or so, 50,000 replies. Now, I can't pretend to have read them all. I did promise to read them all to the Prime Minister if he wanted me to. He wasn't up for that. He's not a good listener. Looking at the questions that come in, what we do then is analyse the subjects that come in, analyse the issues that are behind them, and then ask some of the questions. But looking at the record over the last 6 months, it's very interesting looking at the pattern of questions that come in. To some extent, they reflect whatever the news is of the day, but not always. There's a consistently big number on health, on education, on housing, on mental health, and on education. They vary a bit according to what the subject is at the time, but it's a very interesting way in which people communicate. Now, pre-internet age, you couldn't even have begun to think about doing that. You couldn't ask people to send in postcards on things like that. The numbers couldn't cope with. The issue is how you analyse and use that information and how we develop that as a strong political campaigning tool. And that's exactly the point that Angela was addressing on the policy making. And that we're going to work on and see how we can deal with that. But I say to you this, we've had some quite interesting successes over the past few months in Parliament. And in part, they've come because of the level of internet and social media campaigning. As you know, the Conservatives wanted to take away working tax credits from 3 million families, and they put that forward in the autumn statement. It required a parliamentary vote. We opposed it in the Commons, we opposed it in the Lords, and eventually we defeated them on it, because as of yesterday, 3 million families in this country, 3 million families in this country would have lost £1,000 a year. They won't now because Labour opposed it. It's a Labour victory that they're still going to get that money this year. And when they produced the budget last week, week before, they then came out with the idea they would take away the personal independence payments from those with disabilities that want to live independently and should be allowed to live independently. And surely as a society, we would support people with disabilities, giving them the necessary help in order to live as independently as they possibly can. Surely that is what a civilized society is about. And when this proposal came up in the budget, I met a number of people with disabilities in my own constituency. They were not only appalled, they were truly frightened of what was going to happen to them immediately as a result of it. The outrage that caused it, and then Ian Duncan Smith's resignation, and all that followed from that meant the government was forced to retreat on that. We're not totally out of the woods yet on that one, but we have forced them back on that. I think campaigning is important at all times, not just election time, because you can begin to frame the public debate around disability, around steel, around working tax credits, if you say something about it, do something about it, and mobilise a lot of other people to do something about it. Isn't our political engagement in our unions, in our communities, in our Labour Party, all about collectively making a voice that is a collective voice for good and a collective voice for social justice, rather than saying we can't do anything about it because at this precise moment in time we don't have a majority in Parliament. We've got a big majority of people out there who agree with us that we want to live in a more socially just society. So we're not going to stand by while the Tories create a housing crisis, continue to cut police numbers, destroy social care and our National Health Service, and attack our education system. And on the education system, many people said something about this in the breakout sessions we had this afternoon. I thought it was very interesting, and it came up time and time again. Because there's an attitude in education which is quite an important one, as there is on health. Think about this. Up until the time of the First World War, the idea that the community should pay to provide a service for everybody was a bit of an anathema. The idea would be that if you were rich, you could afford a doctor. If you were poor, you went to a charity hospital or you died. There was a different idea developed by pioneer socialists who said, actually, healthcare is a human right. They campaigned for that. They argued for that case. And it was a post-war Labour government during a period of deep austerity, enormous debt, great problems of reconstruction, nevertheless said it is a priority to invest in healthcare as a human right, free at the point of use. And we achieved that through the National Health Service. The problem is the NHS is under such threat because of the deficit within the NHS, because of its underfunding, because of the Health and Social Care Act, which sends out to the private sector 49% of all services. And I suspect that in the beady eye of many people in the long term, they're going to say, well, you know, the health service is underfunded, you've got a long waiting list, it's all very difficult. Why don't you take out private health insurance? And gradually the whole thing eats away. So instead of a health service of universal provision of high quality care for everybody, it becomes a health service of public last resort for those that can't afford to go private. You'll be familiar with this from the United States. The United States needs an NHS. We're going to keep our NHS, and we'll support you in demanding an NHS in the United States. But on education, our party has always been one that wants to empower people through education. If you think back to the early trade unions, the miners' welfare institutes, early trades councils, many other places, always put great store on education. Working class libraries, popular libraries, adult education institutes, all those things. You can see them, you can still see the names littered around the country. That then became largely local authority run education. And frankly, I think that a local authority is the best place in which to administer education from. So that if you have a citywide education authority or a county-wide education authority, you have a community of education. You have a community of endeavour in running those schools. You have a community of provision in providing the extra needs, the kids, for outdoor pursuits, for special needs, for all the other things that kids can benefit from in school, and an adult education service that provides the opportunity for those who wish to return to education, to change course of their career, or just to learn something very different because they have a love of learning. If we take away the local authority involvement whatsoever and say, well, each school is going to become an academy, I know our Education Secretary is a totally brilliant person. I'm fully aware of that. I've met her, and I've met other Education Secretaries. I know how brilliant they are. But I would not even begin to stand at the foot of their pedestal in my acknowledgement of an ability to administer 30,000 secondary schools all at the same time. What utter nonsense the whole thing is. Surely you need a local authority that can bring those schools together, work with them rather than have them compete with each other, so that we actually support all children going through school. They only have one childhood. But we have to challenge the budget that has done this. We have to challenge the inequalities and injustice that's in that budget, because that budget managed to try and take money away, fortunately unsuccessfully, from personal independence payments, whilst at the same time make cuts in corporation tax and capital gains tax, and left at the end of it a $4 billion black hole in it. It's a very strange form of public accounting that you call this an economic success and a development. George Osborne does have powers of imagination. I'll give him that. I'll absolutely give him that. Now, other issues that came up today were about regional government and how we develop regional government in this country. Because what the Conservatives are doing is offering city deals to certain parts of the country. Manchester's been offered it, Tyneside been offered it, Teesside's been offered it, and other places. And George Osborne talks a great deal about the Northern Powerhouse. Now, Northern Powerhouse is a very interesting idea, and he's so committed to the Northern Powerhouse that they've just moved 97% of the staff that run the Northern Powerhouse from the north to London in order to administer the Northern Powerhouse. It shows a strange commitment to regionalism, that you centralise your regional development ideas. I would have thought you could do things slightly differently. And if you look at the need for regional cooperation and a regional investment strategy, nowhere is it more obviously and cryingly needed than in the southwest, on the rail infrastructure, on the road network, on the housing issues, on the economic development issues. Because if you wish to harness the skill sets that are available, encourage the development of new enterprises and high-tech economy, there has to be the physical communication of the railways and the roads. There also has to be the broadband communications and the efficiency of broadband communications across the whole region. Do you achieve that by diktat from Whitehall? Well, you could, but it might not work. It's much better if you actually strengthen local government and strengthen regional government in order to achieve that. And so we are looking at how we would have a greater level of devolution in the future. We will be setting up a commission on this. You'll hear much more about this after the May local elections, so that we get a general agreement and understanding of what levels of powers we want to devolve to particular regions, and how we want them to be run and how we want them to be elected. But the basis of the thing has to be, surely, local support for it and full accountability for those in charge of it, so that elected officials are held responsible to it by elected councillors, just as members of parliament should hold central government to account. It's quite an important principle. But the other principle is that if there's devolvement of central government services to any local authority, it has to be accompanied by the correct level of funding to maintain those services rather than allow them to be cut. And so our party is in good and strong heart as we go into this election campaign. We're in good and strong heart because of our big membership. We're in good and strong heart because of what Labour councils will do their best to achieve in great difficulty. And I've been visiting an awful lot of Labour councils over the last few weeks and will be right up until the election that comes up. Some have managed to build council housing during periods of incredible difficulty, managed to maintain children's centres when Tory authorities are closing them down, recognising the value of trying to maintain community services. And at the same time, we're demanding proper funding for local government from central government, because if you totally devolve the funding of local government to the local community, it sounds ever so democratic until you look at the disparity of incomes between parts of the country. Devolving local government to North Surrey would mean it would be a lot cheaper for everybody there because the rate values are so very high. Devolving it to a Pennine town would have the opposite effect because the rate value is so low. We don't want to perpetuate and deepen inequalities in our society. We want to eliminate those inequalities in our society by a fairer funding formula across the whole country. And so the party is also contesting the Police and Crime Commissioner elections all over the country. And I want to see changes in the PCC arrangements where there must be greater accountability to what they do and how they operate. They've also now been given the fire service. But I do pay tribute to those Labour PCC, Labour commissioners that have managed to end the use of police cells for people with mental health conditions, that have done a great deal to help victims of domestic violence, that have managed to protect community policing budgets so that we have a better community policing presence. They're also now going to get the fire service foisted upon them because that's what the government's decided. I want the fire service to maintain its proper funding level, which it's not getting at the present time. I also want there to be a statutory recognition of the work the fire service already does in protecting us from flood and improvement of flood defences, because after all, it was the fire service as much as anybody else that saved so many lives in Yorkshire and Lancashire and Cumbria during the floods more recently, and we need to thank them for it and work with them to defend that service. So we point out to the government their failures on industrial development, their failures on housing strategy, their failures on education strategy, their failures within the NHS, but above all, their failures in the way in which poverty has increased within our society, inequality has increased within our society, and the way in which they therefore remove the possibility of good jobs and a good future for so many people. People say to me, well, okay, what you're saying is all very well, it only appeals to one section of the community. No, it doesn't. Because if you're well housed and you've got a reasonable job and you've got a secure pension, a reasonable income, do you actually feel comfortable walking home from the station past people begging on the street? Do you feel comfortable knowing there's a family just down the road with 3 teenage kids in a 1-bedroom flat, unable to do their homework, unable to achieve in school, unable to live a healthy life? Do you feel comfortable in a society that doesn't actually reach out and try and care for all? I don't think you do. I don't think you do at all. It's a fundamental human condition. Do we actually want to walk by on the other side while there's injustice and inequality, or do we actually want to do something about conquering that inequality? I believe it's the latter. People want to conquer that inequality. So in challenging all these issues, we have some huge battles ahead of us. Huge battles ahead of us to not just win elections, but to make sure we win those arguments about the role of the state and how we cooperate with colleagues all across Europe in opposing right-wing discrimination, which is growing across Europe, the growth of the far-right parties, how we support the free movements of people, but also how we deal with the environmental questions that face us all. You cannot deal with environmental issues within a national frontier. Because you know what? Polluting winds that blow don't stop at national frontiers. I don't know what's going on. This wind will blow. carrying foul air, and it won't stop at a national frontier. It'll blow on and it'll reach you. Just as if you throw a plastic bag in the sea off Weymouth, I'm sure none of you would ever dream of doing that, it could well end up in France. Or somebody could throw one in France and end up here. It's how it works. So you have to have international agreement. You have to have international agreement on that. Just as you have to have international agreement on a global level about global emissions targets, about the polluting aspects of heavy industry, and about the importing of goods made where there is a lower level of environmental conditions, which in effect is us exporting pollution somewhere else. There are a whole lot of issues there. You're not going to solve those if you decide everything is an island on your own, because nobody is an island on your own. You've actually got to work with other people in order to conquer those issues. So as a party, we're open to everybody. We have this huge membership. We have young people joining, we have older people joining, we have older people coming back to the party, we have more union affiliations, we have more union members involved. We change things politically by our involvement. We change things politically by our action. We change things by our conversations and our sharing of ideas. And I want this party to be the powerhouse of ideas, the powerhouse of imagination, the powerhouse of collegiate working that can lead us to 2020, not so we're going to produce a surprise document to say, there you are, there's the manifesto. No, it'll be so obvious by 2020 that we do plan for decent housing, we do plan for healthcare, we do plan for mental health care, we do plan to end the gender pay gap, we do plan for industrial development, we do plan for public ownership of the railways, we do plan for so many things. So by that time, there is a huge public debate that's moved away from the territory laid down by Margaret Thatcher, or in the USA by Ronald Reagan. The idea that all that mattered was money and making it at the expense of anybody else, no matter how it was made or by what method it was made. Instead, we build that sense of collective solidarity and collective good. That's what our party was founded to achieve. That's what we're going to continue demanding. That's why I want, if you're watching this, you're not in the Labour Party, to join the party. If you are in the party, get active, knock on some doors before May the 5th, and let's make sure we have resounding Labour results on May the 5th. Thank you very much.